Hi, today we'll be coding these sliders and we're going to dive right into it because this is something that's a lot more complex than my normal simple geometric demos, and I'm sure it's going to take a lot longer because we can't just drop in a formula and poof, everything gets generated from there. We already have this array where we have the slider values and also the colors used for the fills. We are going to get its length, so it's going to be the length of it, okay. Then we're going to have a loop, so for let I going from 0 all the way up to n, increment this I, and then we're going to create our input elements, and they're going to have type range. And we're not done here, but we're going to move on to prettifying things a little bit first. So we're going to start with a base track width, let's say something like 41 ems, and then we're going to have our type range elements. So I can't type the word type, so that should have been type, not TPE. By the way, TPE stands for thermoplastic elastomer, and it's the kind of stuff that gets used in sports articles and things like that. But here we have type range. Okay, so we are not going to do this. I mean, we could do it, but let me show you what happens if we do that. When the viewport gets smaller, the width of our input elements, of our range input elements, stays the same, and we get that ugly scroll bar at the bottom, and we don't want that. We are going to want to set the actual track width as a custom property, and it's going to be the minimum between this base track width and the full viewport width minus a buffer, let's say 20 pixels. So now we are actually going to use okay, so now, isn't that nice? You can see, just elastic. Okay, I'll stop playing with it. Now, the next step, we are also going to set a track height. Let's say 1.5 ems, and this is going to be the inner height. Let me just show you, basically the height of that fill. So around it, we are going to have a padding, and around that, we're going to have the border. So think about the box model right here. So the width is going to be the width of the content box. The height is going to be the height of the content box. Around that, we have the padding. Around that, we have the border. So we are also going to set those as well. So we are going to have input border. We are going to have input padding. So the outer part, so the input outer part is going to be the input border plus the input padding. Okay, so now that we're done with that, we're also going to have a track radius, which is going to be half the track height, right? And let's say that we're also going to set that height as the track height, right? And let's just set a dummy background for now, and you can see how nothing happens. And nothing happens because in WebKit browsers we can't just set a background like that. We need to set WebKit appearance none, and this is the part that I most hate about styling range inputs, you know, having to write all this stuff. So WebKit slider runnable track. This is why I find geometric demos a lot easier, because there's not this much to type, and here there's just typing and there's no formula from which everything can get generated. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of typing until we get to the final result. So that's why I said this is complicated. It involves typing, and I am just so bad at typing, I might accidentally summon Satan. Okay. So now you can see those. And one thing, maybe you're thinking, well, that looks kind of small for 1.5 ems. So considering we haven't set any font size, right? And the base font size on the root is 16 pixels, right? 1.5, that should be 24 pixels, and that looks kind of small for 24 pixels in height. And again, 41 ems times 16, it should be something bigger. And if you're thinking that, you're right, and that's because in both WebKit browsers and in Firefox, the font size of the range input is smaller. It's not the base size that we have on the root. So if we set something like this, font inherit, you're going to see it grow right now. So you can see how it just grew. Now, since we're here anyway, let's do one more thing. Margin 0, just get rid of all margins. And a bit of layout, right? HTML, body, they're both going to get display grid. Okay, now on the HTML, we're also going to make it full height, right? And it's also going to have background. So background, we're going to have a radial gradient, red, it's not going to stay red, but for now, transparent, 3 pixels, and let's position this nicely. You can see it there, right? So let's say a background size, the dimensions for our base background cell, let's say that's going to be the same as the thumb height. Okay, so we're going to use that there, like that. And we're also track. I was thinking ahead, I guess. Okay, so that worked. Now we're going to have another radial gradient, and this one is going to get circle because it doesn't have a fixed square background, and otherwise it's going to be an oval if the viewport isn't exactly squared. So circle, we're going to have something lighter down to something darker, so like that. And let's say that this is going to go up to 20, and something like this. Okay, and then we're also going to have background blend mode screen, like that. Okay, that looks quite nice. A bit more on the body. So first up, place content center, so they're not okay. Now we're going to want a bit of spacing in between them, so we're going to have let's say grid gap, and let's say that the spacing is going to be that input outer twice, doubled, right? So that's going to be the spacing, and we're done with that. We're going to collapse both the HTML and the body, and here we're going to set border radius, track radius, and I cannot spell. Okay, now that worked. And next we're also going to set a transparent border and a padding. So border solid input border, transparent, and padding Now, one thing I want you to notice is that the rounding isn't like we wanted it. And that's because we set the border radius to half the height of the content box. And the border radius, if we want full rounding there, needs to be half the height of the border box. So let me just show you here. So you can see content box, padding box, border box. We have a border, we have a padding, we have a border radius. Now in 3D, I'm going to show you. The border radius is the rounding of the border box. The rounding of the padding box is the border radius minus the border width. And the rounding of the content box is the border radius minus the border width minus the padding. So in our case, we are going to need to add both the border and the padding to the rounding of the inner content box. So we're going to add that input outer part, and you can see again we have something nice. And one more thing I want to show you here is that we can have different gradient backgrounds on different boxes. So we have this gradient that's covering the entire border box. We have this other gradient here that's limited to the padding box, and this other gradient here that's limited to the content box. Now in our case we're going to have only two gradients, one covering the entire border box and one limited to the padding box. So now here we're going to have a linear gradient. So first we're going to have the one for the border box. This is going to be at the bottom, and this is going to be one that's slightly lighter. So we are going, lighter means bigger values. So let's say right, and then we are going to have something similar, except it's going to be limited to the padding box. And again, this is going to be darker. So darker, what does this mean? It means a smaller value. So something smaller than D, let's say B, and again D is smaller than F, so we're going to get something darker. Now next we are also going to want to have a box shadow. So here we have a sort of like very transparent copy of this, and then we also have another shadow with a lot more blurriness, darker. Okay, and then again here on the inside for the inset box shadows we have two of them. We have that thin dark one, and then we can have a bit of more blurry lighter one. So we're going to have two box shadows, two outside, and then we are also going to have two inset ones. So first we are going to have box shadow. Let's take care of first let's say that we're going to make the offsets depend. This is going to have a teeny tiny blur, and it's going to have a low alpha, a very low alpha. HSLA, the hue doesn't matter, saturation is going to be 0. We push the lightness all the way up to white, and set is going to have a low alpha, and then we're going to have that more blurry one, and this one is going to have 0 horizontal offset. The vertical offset is again going to depend on the thumb height, and so is the blur in this case. And I forgot a dollar sign there. Okay, and right, and this is going to be, I don't know, let's say this sort of gray. Okay, what went wrong? Yeah, track. Things that happen when you try to think ahead. You just mess with your own brain. So then we're going to have the inset shadows, and these are both going to have 0 horizontal offset and vertical offset. This is going to be the darker one, right? So this is going to be the top darker one. It's going to have slight blurriness, right? And let's say that so you have to think darker relative to what we have right here. So that's between DC and F5. B9 is going to be darker than both of them. So you can see that thin. Okay, and then we're going to have that other lighter one, right? And this one is going to be lighter, like that. Okay, so we are pretty much done with this, and I think that we can just take this, right, and we're going to make a track mixin. Right here, and put all those styles in there. And similarly, we're going to have a thumb mixin. Okay, and this one is going to have width, thumb width. Okay, and similarly, we're going to have a height, thumb height, and we're going to set background red. Okay, and now we're going to take this right here, right, and we're going to have include thumb, just so that we can see stuff, and we haven't set those, so let's start doing that. Thumb height is going to default to the track height, and the thumb width is going to default to the thumb height. So the thing is, okay, so that should have done something. Let's see it. Yeah, because I cannot type. That's what went wrong. Okay, now having done this, look at it. We're also going to have a thumb radius. Thumb radius, and this one is going to be half the thumb height, and border radius, right, like that. Now what I wanted to say here, we default the thumb width to the thumb height because right here you can see how this, the width is not equal to the height, this, the width is not equal to the height, but here they're clearly equal, here they're clearly equal. Here this triangle can be fitted tightly inside a circle. So let me just show you. So this triangle has all three vertices on a circle. So basically the diameter, both vertical and horizontal diameters, are going to make up the width and the height of our thumb in this case, in the triangular case. So we have that 3 out of 5 have equal width and height, and for the other 2 we're going to set a separate width, but yeah, it's safe to default it to the height. Now having done this, we are going to want to have different dimensions for those thumbs, because you can see how for the second one right here we are going to keep the thumb dimensions equal to the track height, but here they're going to be bigger than track height, here obviously bigger, here obviously bigger, bigger again. So let's say first that we're going to have a rounding radius, and this one is going to be depending on the track height, so the track height over 3, and then so the first thumb height, and now for the first and for the fourth we're going to have the same thumb height, so that's going to be 4 times that rounding radius, and then for the last one, right, we're going to have 5 times, and here the height is equal to the width, and we can just set the diameter, right, height, diameter, it's going to be the same thing, and it's going to be 5 times that rounding radius, and then also for that third one, this one in the middle, we are going to have 6 times the rounding radius. So now let's collapse that a bit and let's start setting them, right? So nth child 3n plus 1. This for n0, this is going to give us 1. For n1 is going to give us 4. So this is the first and the fourth, right? So here we're going to have that the thumb height is thumb height 0, okay? And then similarly for number 3, the thumb height is going to be that d2, and then 5, 4. 1 based index for nth child, 0 based index here. Okay, now this is starting to look like something, and I just noticed. It's just one of those tiny little details. So let me just show you something. But first let me show you this. So you can see how it moves nicely, and always the space around it is always the same, and it's the same spacing around, like right there at the ends. So the same space that we have at the top and bottom. Now here, if we move this one and it gets to the end, we can't drag it any further. And we don't have the same kind of equal spacing. And it gets even worse here because, yeah, we can't pull it any further. And you can see it here as well, because this one is slightly taller than the padding box, so it should go a bit beyond the padding box, right? This one is obviously taller than the padding box. It should go well beyond it, but it doesn't, and that's because this thumb moves within the content box. The content box of what? Well, even that is inconsistent in between browsers. So let's just have this right, and let's see the result here. Oh, and one more thing I want to show you. Here we have a border. So Firefox by default has a border, and here, so we're going to need to take care of that. Let's set box sizing border box, meaning that this width and height are the width and height of the border box, not the content box as it is the default. Now border solid, and this is going to default to 0 and transparent right there. Okay, so now that we're going to refresh, it should look the same. Okay, and you can see how we have the same problem. Okay, now I said that the thumb, the border box of the thumb, moves within the limits of the content box, but the content box of what? Well, in the case of WebKit browsers, it's the content box of the track. In the case of Firefox, it's the content box of the actual range input. So this is something I detailed in this GitHub issue. So I detailed a lot of problems around range inputs. So let me just get there. So this is the WebKit case, and the track is the reddish part, and yeah, that's the border. The transparent space is the padding, and the inner rectangle, that's the content box. And you can see how the thumb moves within the limits of the content box of the track in WebKit browsers. However, here in Firefox, the thumb moves within the limits of the content box of the actual input. So that's pretty messed up, isn't it? Okay, let's get back and see what we can do. Well, here we can, for WebKit browsers, we can simply make the not visible so far track, because we haven't set any styles on this WebKit slider runnable track pseudo element. we can make it slightly longer than the content box of the input, because for now it's border box, padding box, content box all coincide with the content box of the actual input. But we can make this slightly longer by giving it a negative margin, and then the thumb is going to move nicely. So by how much do we need to make it longer? How much does that negative margin need to be? So that negative margin is going to be basically a mover offset. So the mover is the thumb, whatever. So the mover offset is going to be the track radius minus the thumb radius. Oh, this is, so one thing that, so when normally, you know, when I click enter here, you can see how the cursor goes there, not at the start of the line, but here, when I click enter, it goes there. And you know why that is? It's really messed up, but it's because of the minus. So if I have there plus and add with -1 multiplied with that, I don't get that problem. So I don't know why. It's pretty messed up and annoying, but yeah, that's how it is. So now we are going to take this and we are going to set margin to that mover offset, and now you can see how they went past the padding box end, right? And we have the same kind of spacing there. That's so nice. Okay, but this does not work in Firefox. So what do you do for Firefox? Well, it's this little trick. So we can set different styles on WebKit slider pseudos and Moz range pseudos. But what about the actual range input? Well, we can do that with this support selector. So we have styles for WebKit browsers normally, and then inside this support selector, we can set the styles for Firefox for the actual range input. So that's what we're going to do here. So we are going to have, so here, supports selector. And by the way, this is not the same thing as supports a feature. This is if it supports this selector. Okay, and then we're going to reset border, padding, box shadow, background. So border, none. Oh, no. So this is going to be background, box shadow, and padding is going to be 0. And then for the width, right, it's going to be calc the track width minus twice that mover offset. So that mover offset is a negative value in our case, right here, right? And like that. Okay, so now that we've done this, we are also going to take this, actually just take it like this and replace thumb with track. And now let's see it. Okay, and they're not properly aligned and the height is messed up. So let's fix all those things. So first, place self center, set the height, track height plus twice the outer part, so once for the top and once for the bottom. So input outer, right? And this should fix things here as well. So now you can see much better. Okay, so now we've fixed the thumb motion. Let's move on to prettifying the thumbs. So we're going to want to have a nicer background, not just that red. So we're going to use a custom property so we can change it on each of them, right? So we're going to have a thumb gradient, and this is going to have two layers. It's going to have a padding box layer and a border box layer. So thumb inner for the padding box. And then we're also going to have a thumb outer for the border box. Okay, now this inner is going to default to a radial gradient. Radial gradient, red, circle, round radius, right? Red, calc 100% -1 pixel, so we have a smooth 1 pixel transition to transparent, which is being the last stop is at 100% by default, right? And here we're going to have a linear gradient from top to bottom. So at the top we are going to have a lighter gray, and then at the bottom we're going to have a darker gray. So let's say, and then like this. Okay, so it's starting to look like something. Now the next step is going to be proper width for that, for those two, right? So let's say that we're also going to have a thumb unit, and this one is going to be 3 times the input padding. And now, where was that? Let's collapse that supports selector. So here we are going to have a thumb width. Now for that dot we are going to have an offset from the right, so it's going to be at an offset from the right, which for most of them, for this one, and this one, it's going to be the thumb radius. So we're going to have a thumb X offset, which is going to default to the thumb radius. So now let's fix that at, so calc 100% minus thumb X. So let's have that there, like that. Okay, so now let's see. We are going to have a thumb radius, the invisible part here, so thumb radius up to those bars, and that thumb unit is going to be a bar and a gap, right? So we're going to have 2 thumb units. So a thumb radius at the start before the first bar, then the 2 bars and 2 gaps, so that's going to be 2 thumb units. And then we're going to have, then again, it's going to be another thumb radius from that edge to the middle, another thumb radius, and then that thumb X offset to the right edge. So plus 1 more thumb radius, but we have a thumb radius plus another thumb radius. That's going to be a thumb height. So then we're left to add that thumb X offset. Okay, so now for the first one, nth child 1, right, that thumb X offset is going to be the thumb height. So that's the only one where that dot there is further away from the right edge. Okay, so having done this, we are going, let's set some nicer colors and stuff like that. So let's do that. Right, so this is going to be the current value for each of these. We are going to get the current range, and that is going to be the one at index I. Right, then we're also going to have a style array, and this is going to start out with the value. So we set it there like that. And then we're going to have the colors. So we're going to push, we're going to destructure after we go through it, and we modify it such that we have these custom property declarations. So C index is going to be the current item, and finally we are going to join this array properly with semicolons. That is a really weird thing. Okay, and then style here is going to be S. Okay, let's see the compiled HTML. So you can see the value and the colors as custom properties, and they get passed to the CSS that way. Nice. Okay, let's get back here and back here, because we're not going to have red, we are going to have that second color, C1, and suddenly things change for the better. Okay, now next step is, let's prettify that one because it looks simpler. Okay, so basically we are going to start by setting that outer part as a border. So nth child 2, so we're going to have thumb border, right, and this one is going to be calc the thumb radius minus the rounding radius, and then we're going to have thumb outer. It's going to be linear gradient 90 degrees, like this. Okay, and then we're going to have the thumb inner, and on the inner we're going to want to emulate the padding box background of the track. So where was that? Is here, and we're actually going to take it out of there. And again, I cannot type. So we are going to set it right here. And then let's collapse those for a little while. Like that. Okay. Okay, but we want it to be the height of the track padding box. So we are just going to have it like this. and then 1% because it's going to repeat itself, it doesn't matter, and then the size is going to be the track height plus twice the input outer, no, twice the input padding, because we don't want the border included, right? Okay, so like that. So now that we've done that, we're also going to want to have a shadow. So box shadow, so now, so it's going to have tiny, both horizontal and vertical offsets, 3 pixels, and this should be pretty dark because the dark part of that padding right there is quite dark, right? So let's say yeah, it should be inset inside, not outside. Okay, that looks nice. But I think that ring looks a bit too thin, and the part in the middle, yeah. So we're going to subtract something less, something like that. Okay, that looks much better. So we are done with this one. Now let's move on to the last one, and we're going to change the thumb gradient directly. So we're going to have radial gradient, and we are going to go up to that rounding radius. And if I could just type that. And then we're going to have something very light. So we're going to have a very light background there. So something very close to white, let's say. Like that. I don't know. Something like that. And of course we want an almost sharp transition, so it's not going to be zero direct because that's going to give us a jagged edge and we don't like that, but we are going to use that rounding radius plus 1 pixel inside the calc. So we're going to have calc plus 1 pixel, and let's say this goes up to 70%, and actually we need to set closest side, right? Or otherwise we can just ditch that and just multiply 70% with 70%, so that's going to be some 49%, let's say 50%, just to round it. It's going to look more like that. Yeah, but then that's not going to be at 100%. Yeah, let's get back to closest side, because it's easier. We don't have to set a percentage there as well. Okay, so I think that looks nice, and we are done with the last one as well. And now let's focus on the first and the fourth, right? Look at them, how nice they move like that. Okay, so first up, we are going to want to get that, so we're cutting off half a thumb height. So basically you can imagine we have a rounding like we have right there, we have it there, but it's just cut off. Okay, so we're cutting off that part there, and then we have those gaps after the lines, and we're going to do all that stuff with masking. Now this is where things get really interesting, because masking still requires a prefix in WebKit, and compositing still has some non-standard values in WebKit. So this is why I said it gets interesting, because we are going to add this prefix, which is going to default to nothing, but here we're going to have, so prefix mask now here for the WebKit one, we are going to have WebKit. So, right, now here, let's first take care of those lines masking. So thumb lines, we're going to start with a linear gradient, 90 degrees, transparent, and it's going to be transparent up to thumb radius, which is half the thumb height, thumb radius, and then it's going to be red, and we are going to set the thumb mask. It's going to default to that, and of course we have a sharp transition there, like that. Okay, and you see how it gets cut off there. Of course, we're going to need to also subtract those gaps, and we're going to do that with another, also 90 degrees, and we're going to have transparent, and it's going to go from 0 up to half a unit. So that's a unit, and then similarly it's going to be red up to a full unit, right? And this is going to start at thumb radius, and of course we are also going to have, there's always going to be no repeat, so no repeat in all cases. And then we're also going to have mask composite, and again this is the more interesting part, because we have different values for the standard and the WebKit version. So we are going to have thumb composite, and here we're going to interpolate. So if the prefix is nothing, so we're in the standard version, so standard, otherwise WebKit, right? And we are going to default here to exclude, which is the standard version. But here this is going to be XOR. So now you can see that, but here we haven't set a background size. So the background size is going to be twice the unit, and vertically it's going to be 100%, because otherwise Safari messes things up. Okay, so now you can see how we have those bars, and they get close to that. Now for the first one we're going to need a bit more in terms of masking, but for the first one we're done. So yeah, okay, let's go back to the first one. So this one is going to need a bit more in terms of masking. So can't we do that part, that end right there with border radius? Well, we can't, because border radius is going to produce a rounding, so the ends of the rounding are going to be tangent at the top with the vertical edge, and laterally they're also going to be tangent with the lateral edge. And here the tangent to the curve does not coincide with the vertical edge. So that's valid for both the top and the bottom curve. So we can't do that with border radius. We need to do it with masking. So let's just see exactly how. So thumb mask, right? Then we're going to have radial gradient. So we need to get that radius. Now let's imagine we have the radius up to the top, and it crosses the middle of that point. So the distance to the end is that x offset, which in this case is equal to the height. So this is going to be the thumb height, right? And then we're going to have a radius that goes up to somewhere there, right? And this part of the radius is going to be half the thumb height, so the rest of the radius from that point in the middle is going to be the radius minus half the thumb height. Now, the distance from the center of the circle up to that point is also going to be the radius. So here we're going to have a right triangle. So this line from that point in the middle to the middle of that little disc, that line is horizontal, so it's going to be perpendicular onto the vertical radius. So here you can imagine how we have a right triangle, and this right triangle, this edge is the thumb height, this the vertical edge right here is the radius minus half the thumb height, and this one is the radius. So let's just put that a bit here. So that rounding radius, right, minus half the thumb height squared plus the thumb height squared is the hypotenuse, the radius squared. So the vertical edge, right, is the radius minus half the thumb height, right? So that's one edge. Then we have this other one, which is the thumb height, right? And then we have the hypotenuse, which is the radius. Okay, so this is how we get that relationship and that triangle. So let's compute that, expand stuff. And here we're going to have minus 2 times the radius times the height over 2. So 2 over 2, those two just go, right? Plus the height squared over 4 plus the height squared, and this is going to be the radius. Now we can just get rid of that, so those two there, and we can also get out a height, right? So there we get rid of the square like that, so that 0 doesn't matter. That minus radius, we can move it on the other side and it's going to be with plus, right? So, and this is going to be 5 times the height over 4, which is the same thing as 1.25, right? So our thumb's rounding radius for the mask is going to be 1.25 times the thumb height, and that's how we got it. Okay, so let's create that. So it's going to be a circle, that's going to be its radius at 0 horizontally, and at radius vertically, right? Then we are going to have red transparent, and it's going to get attached to 100%, and this and it's going to need that 100% because Safari is not going to like it otherwise. But yeah, now one thing here, we have that jagged edge, which I don't like, so we are going to make things better, because we're going to need that for the next radial gradient as well, so might as well. So something like that, but there we're going to have 100%, and it's going to be calc minus 0.5 pixels, and we're going to take this calc and we're going to use it for the transparent as well, except it's going to be with plus, right? Okay, so that looks nice. Now we are going to have another one which is going to be very similar, except in this case we are going to have here the vertical position is going to be 100% minus that radius. So now you can see how they exclude each other and we get the part outside. So then we are going to have those thumb lines on top. Let's see that, and we get that nice result. Now one thing I don't like is those thin lines there. I'm not sure if you can see them, but can you see them? It's getting weirder as I zoom, but those thin lines there, that's what I mean. So weirdly, those are caused by the border radius. So if I remove the border radius, those lines disappear. But I can't remove the border radius, and I can't change that thumb radius to 0 because that's used in computations for the mover and for the mover offset and stuff like that. So something else I can do there is another custom property, and it's that one that I'm going to change here, and I'm also going to need to 0 it for this one, for the third one. So let's just do that. So we're going to have nth child odd nth child minus n plus 3, so only the first 3. And we've zeroed that radius. Okay, so now we're done with the first one, and we are moving on to the last thumb, this one right here, which is very similar to something I did in a previous video. So not this one, where is it? Here. So this one, I actually did a video about this, how to do this. So it's a very simplified case because the tip of this inner triangle is also the center of the rounding. So let's see it here. That's going to be the tip of the inner triangle. This is going to be another tip of the inner triangle. So it's going to look like that. Okay, so now let's, we are going to take a few things from here. I'm not actually going to copy paste everything, but just a few basic things. So we're also going to import that module. Okay, me and using a keyboard. So okay, and so now here, this is the vertex angle. So basically this is the angle at each of the 3 vertices of the triangle. So this is an equilateral triangle. The sum of the angles in a triangle is always 180 degrees. An equilateral triangle has all angles equal, so basically it's going to be 180 degrees divided by 3, 60 degrees. And then half of this, because we draw these lines that split the angles into half, and they also split the opposing edges into half, by the way. So, and they're perpendicular onto the opposing edges and all that stuff. But the thing is, they split the angles into half, so 60, half of it is going to be 30, right? So I have, you can see the vertex angle, half of the vertex angle, the sine, the cosine. Let's also have tangent. Of that half angle, right? Now here we're going to get half the diameter, which is going to be the radius. So the diameter is basically the circumdiameter, the diameter of the circumcircle, the circle on which all the vertices are situated. The radius is going to be the circumradius, the radius of the same circle, right? So it's going to be half if I can spell stuff right. We're also going to compute the height of the triangle. So the triangle height is going to be, let's get here, we have this part right here, which is a radius, and also this part right here, and that's a right angle, because we said that line is perpendicular, so that's a right angle. That's the circumradius, so we know it, we know that angle, right? So this over the hypotenuse is going to be sine of that angle. So this bit right here is going to be the circumradius, which you already know, times the sine. Okay, because we already computed and we set it, so that's the sine of that small half angle. Okay, so the circumradius plus the circumradius times the sine, and we can actually just take it out and multiply, right, in parentheses. Now the next thing that we're going to need to compute, let's go back here, it's going to be this vertical y offset, and that's going to be the hypotenuse in this triangle. So this small rounding radius, the corner rounding, this one is going to be, let's say, half of that rounding radius. Okay, and then so in this right triangle, so this small corner rounding over the hypotenuse is going to be the sine of that small angle. So the hypotenuse is going to be this corner rounding over the sine. So the corner rounding over the sine, and then we are going to have the distance from the vertex along the edge. So let's see that. So it's going to be the distance from the vertex along the edge, so up to there, like that, or the same distance is right here. So always we have right triangles, and the tangent of this angle is that small radius over that distance. So the distance is the small corner radius over the tangent. So over the tangent, right? So we've computed all those things, and now let's move on here, and let's set a background. So we're going to have linear gradient from white to black, just like we did the previous time. Just check out that video, because as I said, I'm not going to go into details. I already did in detail how to get this shape, and it's the exact same shape, it's the exact same technique, so I'm going to go pretty fast to it. And now we're going to have conic gradient, right? And it's not going to be from the default 12 o'clock, it's not going to be from 6 o'clock, but from 6 o'clock. So 6 o'clock points down, and we want from this direction. So from 6 o'clock we go back 30 degrees. 6 o'clock means 180 degrees. So 180 degrees minus the half angle. And this one is going to be at 50%. And that distance from the vertex, that y distance that we computed, like that. Okay, and then we are going to have y and the vertex angle, and then transparent after white. And of course, it's going to need like that. and we're going to need to limit the height, right? So it's going to be 0, 0. Horizontally, it can be 100%, but the height is going to be limited to the height of the triangle minus the corner rounding. So it's going to look like that. Okay, and then we're also going to want to have a clip path to have that triangular shape, the outer. So clip path. And here we're going to have polygon 50% 0, so that's the vertex at the top, right? And then we are going to, so that's 50% 0, and then we're going to need to get this point. So horizontally, it's going to be 50% that's up to here, and then we're going to need to subtract this part right here. Now, this is the same radius as this one right here, so this hypotenuse is also going to be 50%. So this distance right here is going to be 50% times cosine. So from 50%, we're going to subtract 50% times cosine. So that's going to be 50% times 1 minus cosine. And we're going to need to interpolate all of it. So interpolate all of it. And then vertically, right, vertically we're going to have 50% plus 50% times sine, because again we have the same right triangle, and this one is going to be the hypotenuse, which is 50% of the size, times the sine of that. So here is going to be 50% times 1 plus sine, and then we're just going to have the same, except this one is going to be with plus cosine. So that gives us that nice triangle. Okay, now another thing, we're going to want to have blending between those background layers. So here, background blend mode. So let's add that. Difference. Okay, so it's starting to look like something. We are going to need some milder colors there. So we're going to add another layer. This one is going to be a linear gradient, and we're going to use an HSLA value. The hue doesn't matter. Saturation is going to be 0, and then we're going to have something and semi-transparency and some stuff like that. Okay, and of course we're going to have a normal blend mode on top, so we don't have blending. And actually we can do with something darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. So let's say it's going to be something like that. So at the top is going to be darker, so we subtract 10, and at the bottom we add 10. Now something else we can do to smoothen things, because we have a bit of jagged edges, we can add a filter. So it's going to be something like that. blur 1 pixel, contrast 2, and we can make it a bit, we can make it less harsh, contrast 0.8. This looks softer, but we're still missing those rounded corners that we're going to get with masking. So let's actually use the gradient, use the background gradient, because it's going to be more obvious like that. So we're going to start with a radial gradient at the top for the top rounding. So basically, a radial gradient at that point right there is going to be transparent up to there and red from there on. Okay, so circle, the rounding is going to be that corner rounding, thumb C2, at 50% horizontally, and then we're going to have that Y offset that we computed earlier, and it's going to be transparent, but actually we're going to use this multiple times, so again it's the same situation. So we're going to have transparent, then we're going to have calc 100% minus 0.5 pixels. Then we're just going to copy paste this, and it's going to be very similar, except here it's going to be plus, and we're going to replace that transparent with red, right? So it's going to look kind of like that. Okay, something went wrong because yeah, that should have been transparent. Circle at 0%. Transparent red. Let's see it. Okay, that's interesting. What did I miss? Oh, let's actually okay, so it's circle, right? Okay, we should have had a comma there. At 50%. Okay, that works. Like that. Okay, it's towards the top. Okay, is it the list? Okay. I don't know what is wrong there. Oh, it's too far. So let's say okay, that looks fine. Was it different before? Because I thought it was the same thing. Okay, whatever. So this is the first one, and then we're going to have the ones at the corners. So circle at, and this one is going to be 100%, and then we are going to have that tiny offset there, so that's going to be the top, right? And that's going to be the corner rounding times the sign. So the corner rounding times the sign, right? And then oh, and obviously we're also going to, let's get rid of this for a little while, and we're going to need to set dimensions like this. Okay, we're going to need to set dimensions and no repeatedness. Okay, so dimensions, position is going to be 0, 0. Dimensions 100% can be like that. and then the height is going to be that vertex distance, right? So if you draw a perpendicular from there, like that, that's going to be cosine. So it's going to be the vertex distance times cosine, and no repeat, like that. And you can see it there at the top. Now actually, if we set here font size 2ms, okay, it's more obvious. Now like this. Okay, so now we are back to this part, and we're going to have a position. So position is going to start at 0 horizontally, and vertically it's going to be, actually let's compute the dimensions and the vertical position, because it's going to be the same for both at the bottom, right? So dimensions. First, horizontal dimension. So horizontal dimension is going to be from this edge right here, so the tangent, the vertical tangent to the circle, up to here, right? So up to there, it's going to be half of it, right? So the circumradius minus this part right here, plus this part right here, which is that vertex distance. So it's going to be the circumradius plus the circumradius times the cosine, minus the cosine. So we went from the edge up to here, we subtract this part, which is the circumradius times the cosine of this angle, and then we're going to add the vertex distance. Okay, so here we can actually have just multiply with 1 minus cosine, right? And then vertically is going to be that little bit, which is the rounding, the corner rounding, times the sine plus the corner rounding. So the corner rounding times the sine plus the corner rounding. So basically we can just have something like this. So that's the vertical dimension. And then we're going to have the vertical position, which is going to be the height of the triangle minus this vertical size. So it's going to be the second component. Like that. So now let's go back here. So the position is going to be 0 horizontally, right, and vertically it's going to be like that, and the size like that. And again, it's going to be no repeat. Where is that? Right there. And you can see how we can get the corner there again. So then we're going to have something like this, and this one is going to be at 0, and here is going to get attached to 100%. So let's actually have something like this. Okay, much nicer. Okay, so this is going to be the actual mask. Okay, and then we're also going to have linear gradient red, red. And yeah, that works nicely. Okay, and we're not going to need the no repeat because we actually set mask repeat to no repeat everywhere, so we're not going to need those. Okay, one more thing we're going to want is move this slightly down so it's better aligned. So that's going to be done with a transform. So we are starting to get somewhere. That's cool. Okay, so after we've done this, okay, translate Y, and then we're going to have calc. So we are going to use thumb radius, oh, like that, half the thumb radius, right? No, 25 minus corner rounding, like that. Okay, so that's it. We are done with that as well. So next up, the fill. Now that because of issues that are described in detail in this issue thread, so we are going to set that fill. Well, in WebKit we can't set it otherwise anyway, and in Firefox there are many issues, so it's simpler to do it this way. We're going to set it with another layer right here. So another linear gradient, 90 degrees. So something like this, limited to content box. Yeah, let's get rid of that. Okay, so we want it limited by the value, and we're going to have no repeat, obviously. But we need to know the background size. Okay, and that's going to depend on the value. So we're going to need to update the value on drag, and of course this is only going to work if JS is enabled. So first up, class list add JS. So we are only going to add that top layer. That top layer is going to have a non-zero background size only if JS is enabled, only if we have this class. And then we're also going to have add event listener input. This is going to be our range input, right? And we are going to update like that. Now we're done with the JS part. Right here, so we have that JS class, and it's going to have a custom property set to 1. Now we're not going to want to write the fallback to 0 many times, so we're just going to have this version, this sort of like fallback, just so that we don't write that 0 fallback many times. Okay, so now we're also going to want to set a minimum and a maximum And let's clean up things a bit. So in case the value is not set, in case those colors aren't set, so for stuff like that. Okay, so we are also going to have a body here, some styles, that. So was there a minimum set? Was there a maximum set? And we can't do it like this because the minimum may be minus 100 and the maximum may be 0, but 0 or 100 is going to give us 100, so this is not really going to work. So we also have the condition if the maximum was explicitly set to the actual 0 value, and in that case we still use the maximum, otherwise we use that default 100. And something similar we're going to have here. Except it's going to, so instead of the maximum we are going to have that, and here instead of 100 we're going to have dead in the middle, in between the minimum and the maximum. Okay, now here in the style attribute we are going to have, so the minimum, the maximum, okay, and this is not going to show up if it wasn't, if underscore min was never set. Okay, we're done with those. Now just have that if. So that looks fine. Then we're also going to compute a ratio here. So ratio. So what is this ratio? Is the ratio between the value minus the minimum and the numeric range, which is the maximum minus the minimum. Okay, so now that we're here, right, you may be thinking it's going to be enough to just have 0 and here calc ratio times 100%, and of course only in the JS case, so it's going to be something like that, right? So it seems to be working fine, right? But when we start dragging these, you're going to see how it doesn't really work fine, because you can see how it goes too far in that direction and it doesn't go enough in this direction, so it doesn't cover enough. So how much do we want it to cover? We want it to cover up to the end of the thumb minus that thumb x, which goes to the middle. Minus that thumb x is from the right edge to the middle of that circle, which is, except for the first one, is basically half the thumb height. Okay, so how do we get that? Well, first we're going to need to compute a start. So that is going to be the position at the minimum. Now the position at the minimum is basically where the thumb starts from the offset, which is negative, so it goes beyond the content box within which the fills, so to say. So we're going to have a progress start, which is the thumb width plus the mover offset minus so that is the progress start position, and that is the position from where we are going to start everything. Okay, and then we're also going to have a range of motion for the thumb, so mover width, so the width of the segment on which the middle of the thumb moves. So that is going to be calc the track width minus twice the mover offset, and this gives us the width of the box within which the border box of the thumb moves, right? And we're going to subtract the thumb width once, because half a thumb width from one end and another half from the other end. Okay, right, so here, and then we are going to have the progress width, which is calc the progress start plus ratio times the mover width. Okay, so now here that's going to be progress width, and it's not going to be times 100%. And now when we drag this, it's going to look all nice, right? So for those that have equal width and height, it's going to go up to the middle, right? For the other ones, it's going to go up to the end minus that thumb X offset, which is the thumb rounding here, or half the thumb height, and here is going to be the thumb height. Okay, so that looks fine. There's just one more thing left, that there we want continuity there, so that means that this is going to go up to calc 100% plus, so if JS times thumb X, right? So like that. And for the second one, right, so the outer thumb, this one is going to be positioned at 100%, and the size is going to be calc progress width plus thumb X. Okay, and now you can see when we drag this, it looks nice everywhere. Let's see it all in Firefox as well. Okay. So something went wrong for the second one for Firefox. We're going to see it now, but did I save everything? Okay, so something is being messed up. Now it seems to work. I don't know what to make of it, but something still seems to be wrong for the inner one. I don't know if it's... Is it that? It should have just repeated. Okay, I don't know. So for some reason those get messed up on refresh. I don't know why. Whatever. So let's see stuff. Okay, so that is going to need 100% height because apparently, so this is emulating Safari. Okay, and it works there as well. Okay, well, that seems to be almost it. Everything seems to be working fine. Now, one tiny little thing. Okay, hover and focus. We're going to have select 1, and here we're going to have filter and saturate, something like this. Okay, let's also have a transition. Filter, something like this. Oh, this one is gray, so it's probably not the best way to put it. Yeah, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to come up with a different focus hover style, but for now I'm just going to leave it here. I'm not going to tweak with it anymore. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, if you like the work that I'm putting out since early 2012 and you want me to be able to do more in the future, please consider supporting it. You can do so by being a cool cat and becoming a patron on Patreon, or if monthly support is not your style, there's the option of a one-time donation, or you can make the stray cat happy with a gift off her wish list, or you could at least share this to show the world what can be done with CSS these days, because honestly I think it's pretty damn cool. In any event, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!